Hello and welcome to another MovieBoozer.com virtual pub. I'm your host, Ken Ackman, and I'm joined by Bill Leon today.
How do?
And there is a slight possibility we may be joined by some others later on as they get their lazy asses in gear.
We'll see. We'll see. No promises.
We'll see. No promises, but, we'll see. With that said, I do not have a beer to talk about this week. Maybe next week. Who knows?
I got the smaller bottle of Ron Rico today, which I usually have the bigger bottle, but this one's actually glass. The big jugs are plastic, so this is new to me.
That's high tech.
It's been a while since I've had a glass bottle of liquor.
Yeah, I'm sure it's better than the Ron Rico you get in the plastic bottle, right?
I'm sure it's the same shit.
It reminds me when I was in college, they had Captain Morgan was a very popular rum at the time, but there were also some rip-offs like Admiral Nelson.
Right, yeah.
Admiral Nelson, I don't know if you've ever seen it, but it's pure gasoline.
I'm just going to cut out a picture of Mike Nelson's head and put it on the bottle. That'll make me feel better about it.
But I just remember for a fifth, it was for a fifth of Admiral Nelson, it was $8.99.
Oh yeah, that's how much I paid for this bottle. So.
Right. Yeah. Well.
Yeah.
That's I guess that's a good equivalent then.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, we have some movies to talk about today. Now, before we get into the major releases of the week, that being the expansion of Birdman, or the unexpected Virtue of Ignorance, and Nightcrawler, we're going to talk about a movie that Bill saw, because guess what? Bill Leon saw a movie.
I did. I didn't, and that's the thing. This movie, let me just talk. The movie is Horns, starring Daniel Radcliffe. From what I understand, it premiered at a film festival last year, so this movie's actually been done for quite some time. And it just dropped onto iTunes on October 6th, but then they decided to give it a theatrical run for Halloween, and I watched it because of its recent theatrical run. And I said to a friend of mine, I would not be surprised if this is out of theaters before the end of this week, because...
And you're very much right, because I have not seen it in a single theater in my area.
Mm-hmm.
So.
It's definitely not a movie worth going out to the theater to see. Like, if you have any interest in seeing Horns, I will tell you right now, get it on iTunes, get it...
It strikes me as the kind of movie that'll be on Netflix in about 3 months.
It probably is, yeah.
So tell me about the movie.
All right, well, this movie, first off, let me just get the two main things that basically everybody's complaints, because these are basically the complaints that everybody else has already made about the film.
Hold on, before you do the complaints, let's get a brief synopsis, because this is a movie that I'm sure not very many people have heard of.
Mm-hmm. Well, the film is about Daniel Radcliffe, who plays an American in the movie, and he is in love with his childhood sweetheart. They met when they were like 10 years old. The movie doesn't specify how old they were when they met, but they met as children, and they've been together their whole lives, and he's planning on proposing to her, and she's murdered, and he's the main suspect. And they live in this very religiously conservative town where everybody's pointing the finger at Daniel Radcliffe, saying he did it. And nobody has any proof. They're like the evidence. Somebody burned down the forensics lab and sabotaged the evidence.
Really?
So, yeah, like he's just fucked into being the prime suspect here. The only person that believes he didn't do it is his best friend, who is also his lawyer.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, okay, so that's your basic premise of the movie. But then one day he wakes up with some horns growing out of his head.
Okay.
And the thing about the horns, or rather, the premise behind the horns, is that people will uncontrollably tell him their deepest, darkest secrets and fears, and they'll basically just be brutally honest with him.
Hmm.
But here's like problem number one for me
So,
is
so I guess the insinuation that they're giving is that he's turning into the devil or something like that,
yeah,
or
a
a
lot
demon,
like I
maybe?
said, yes, a lot of the townsfolk in the movie that are protesting him because there's a lot of people like outside of his house with picket signs and stuff that say stuff about God and you're the devil because you killed this girl. Like that's sort of a thing they build up before the horns come into play, which is
Mhm.
that the whole town calls him a devil because he killed this girl. Um, Something I should mention about the girl, and I will go into this in greater detail a little later, but the movie builds this girl up to be like a vision of perfection. Uh, they cast a gorgeous actress. There are countless glamour shots of her just looking gorgeous. And, like, I'm not going to lie, yeah, she's a pretty girl.
So it sounds like from that, it kind of makes me think of the beginning of Gone Girl, which I know you haven't seen yet, but
Right.
with Gone Girl, the way
Well, I
it
mean,
begins is it makes you think that this person, was, just a wonderful person, and then over time they start stripping away that veneer.
no. Are you talking about with the murder victim?
Right, in Gone Girl?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Premise-wise, yeah, it's very similar to Gone Girl because what I have heard about Gone Girl, I kept thinking like, wow, this is similar to Gone Girl throughout the movie. But that, on the other hand, and this is a big thing that bothered me about the movie, is
Hmm.
that they don't do that. Basically, like I said, the movie romanticizes the shit out of this girl. The movie wants you as a viewer to fall in love with this girl, like Daniel Radcliffe is in love with this girl. And I guess yeah, that's supposed to make a connection between you and him. You know what I mean?
Okay.
But my whole thing with it is just that this girl is way too perfect. And there's a scene where they almost corrected that, but then they go back on it later. I guess I should probably go through the plot more before I go spoiling that. But okay, the first thing I want to talk about though is with the horns. The whole premise with the horns is that people reveal their dark secret selves to him. But
Okay.
the first encounter you have in the movie of that is he meets this bartender and takes her home and bangs her. Later on in the movie, you find out that they were old childhood friends. But so that's it. And then he grows the horns, and that girl is still there. So he talks to the girl, and she becomes obsessed with eating these donuts. Like there's a box of donuts, and she's like, "Can I eat all of these donuts?" And she's shoving donuts into her mouth. Okay, that doesn't make any fucking sense. The one part of that scene that actually ties into the premise of the horns is that she says something along the lines of, "No one in this town respects me. No one in this town will fuck me unless they're drunk. They all see me as trash." That is a line that applies to your premise, but the whole donut thing, I don't get. Because it's literally like she's eating these donuts and she says, "I feel sick. I shouldn't have any more." And then there's like a pause and she's like, "Can I eat the rest of them?" "Yeah, I'm gonna eat these donuts." And it's just like,
Does
what am I
Is there
watching?
any establishment to the donuts that the donuts are like really good?
They're just regular ass donuts. I mean, donuts are good, but they're not like.
Hold on. This is a Canadian film, isn't it?
It, is it?
Were they at a Tim Hortons?
No. They were in Daniel Radcliffe's house. But actually, now that you mention it, I believe this was filmed in Canada. And one thing I have to get out of the way right now is that Daniel Radcliffe hasn't quite nailed the American accent yet. A lot of times,
I was
he'll
going to ask about that. Yeah.
yeah, he'll go off into like Irish territory or sometimes Canadian territory. And what's even weirder is that sometimes he'll mimic the accent of someone that's talking to him unintentionally.
Well, that's kind of. I have to admit, when I speak to someone who has a different accent,
Hmm.
sometimes my instinct, and I end up kind of starting to mimic their voice. Particularly in my area, there's some people whose accent's a little bit more country-ish, and if I talk to them for a little bit, I start to get a little bit of a twang in my voice. It just happens.
Hmm.
And
I understand. Maybe not with like regional accents, but just with sort of quirky accents. That has happened to me.
mm,
But with Daniel, but my whole thing with Daniel Radcliffe though is that like we have so many of these British guys coming in and taking American acting roles,
the
and
gerbs.
basically, yeah. And I mean, it's like
Well, there's a reason for that, and
if you're gonna hire a British guy to do an American accent, make sure he can pull it off through the whole film because Daniel Radcliffe gets a little shaky here and there throughout the movie. Like I said,
okay, and I'll go with you on that. I will actually. That kind of reminds me of watching the first season of The Wire. The one of the main characters in The Wire, Dominic West, is British, and in the first season, whenever he's talking, at length, you can hear him slip in and out of it. But in later seasons, it kind of goes away, and it's almost indiscernibly. I mean, it's clear that he's playing an American character, and you couldn't tell. I'm wondering if it's just a matter of this being maybe one of his first attempts.
I think that's
it before.
I don't think so. I know he did the play Equus, but I don't know if that I don't know what kind of accent that required.
Yeah, in theater, there's less rules when it comes to that, and
Right.
you don't have to be as accurate. With theater, it's much more the presentation as opposed to like the subtle nuance.
I'll give you a couple examples here of British guys I think that can just go above and beyond with it. Like, have you seen David O. Russell's I Heart Huckabees?
I have not.
Jude Law in I Heart Huckabees, you would swear that motherfucker's American. He is damn good at it.
Well, Jude Law has had some wonderful American character performances.
True.
I would say my absolute favorite of his, and I'm pretty sure we've talked about this movie before, and you said that you hadn't seen it yet. The Road to Perdition.
Nope. And that's a Stephen King, Frank Darabont. Is that right?
I don't believe it's a Frank Darabont. I could be wrong. It's directed by Sam Mendes.
Okay, but it is a Stephen King story?
No, it's based on a graphic novel by Max Allan Collins.
Oh, well then, yeah, I don't even know what I'm
And Richard
talking about.
Peters Rainier, I guess.
Maybe is Tom Hanks in it?
Tom Hanks and Paul Newman.
I'm just confusing Tom Hanks' role in that with his role in Green Mile.
It also has a young Daniel Craig. And
Okay.
yeah, actually, though, Jude Law is easily my favorite character in the movie. His character is a crime scene photographer, but also a hitman.
Okay.
And so very often he will kill something, kill someone, and then he'll come back to the scene once the cops are there to photograph it. And in his he has his own dark room where he develops pictures. And there's this great scene where he's pursuing Tom Hanks' character. Tom Hanks is like, "So what do you do?" And he just looks at him and says, "I shoot dead people." And he has this smile on his face that's just so creepy.
Oh! You know who I totally spaced on, but I'm going to mention him right now? Bobby fucking Hoskins. Englishman. American accent.
Most people our age grew up thinking Bob Hoskins was a New Yorker or something.
Yes. I've said this before, but I'll say it again. I think Bob Hoskins is an honorary New Yorker, just for Roger Rabbit and Mario Brothers alone.
Yeah, I admit I didn't notice, even though I saw Mario Brothers, that was probably the first movie, that or Roger Rabbit were probably one of the first movies I saw with him in it.
Mm-hmm.
To my knowledge, I didn't comprehend him as Bob Hoskins. So, if I saw, until I saw him in much later, British performance. So, for me, it never clicked that it was the same character. I don't know. Point being, with horns, Daniel Radcliffe's voice didn't quite fully convince you that he was...
No. It's just... At times he pulls it off, and then at other times he doesn't. It's real weird and inconsistent.
Was his character supposed to be American or Canadian? Because Canadians there are a whole bunch of different Canadian accents, and
You know what? That's a good point. Well,
both.
that's a really good point because they never specify where this movie takes place.
Okay.
Maybe they do. Maybe they do in the book, but in the film they do not specify where the movie takes place. I had just assumed that it was Maine because this is Stephen King's son that wrote the story.
That would make sense too. Yeah.
Well, I mean, not only would it make sense. I mean, if you watch the film, like geographically, it looks a lot like Maine. It's sort of like a wooded area where it's very cold, and you know.
That said, Maine. You've heard people with Maine accents before, right?
Yes, I will say that nobody in the movie really has a Maine accent, so maybe.
Okay. So
not.
I'm going to assume because they don't have those accents that it's not Maine. Granted, a lot of Stephen King movies that take place in Maine, you know, the actors don't have those accents.
True.
But still, I'm going to go ahead and say it takes place. To give it the most possible credit, I'm going to say that the movie probably will take place somewhere in Canada in a region where the accents can vary. Because there are some areas where there's a much heavier Scotch-Irish influence in the accent.
Yes, and that happens a couple times in the movie. Somebody that has an Irish accent will speak to Daniel Radcliffe. And there's one specific instance I'm thinking of, and I don't remember what the line the lady says to him is. She says something like, "You're the devil. You're the goddamn devil."
So it doesn't verge by any means into like Highlander territory where you have the French Christopher Lambert playing a Scotsman and a Scotsman playing like a Spaniard, Egyptian, whatever the fuck you call Sean Connery's character. And of course, Sean Connery makes no attempt to not sound like a Scotsman. Because that's the only accent he does.
That's like his trademark, though. Like Sean Connery, when he played like Alan Quartermain, he didn't do any type of accent. He just stuck with the Scots. But anyway, I will say this: I'm about to get into super spoilers with Horns. So if you don't want, if you do want to see the movie and you don't want it spoiled, skip ahead.
Yeah, go ahead and spoil it for me. I don't care.
Like I said, his best friend, who is also his lawyer, there are a few lengthy flashbacks to when Daniel Radcliffe's character was a child, and basically, like when they were kids, when him and this girl fell in love. His best friend was interested in her, and they made. Long story short, like he had to fix this necklace of hers, and the best friend was going to give it to her, but they traded something to where he could give it to her. And I guess, like long story short, the best friend is the one that killed her. The best friend has regretted letting him get the girl his whole life. And wanted revenge and blah 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 blah. This is at the third act point. I think on the drop of a dime, this movie in its third act just goes right down the fucking toilet and just gets really really contrived.
Okay.
And that's really saying something because this is a doozy of a premise that seems pretty contrived to begin with, but the first two acts handle it pretty naturally. As soon as that third act comes in, it's just like it just gets so calculated and sort of like nothing feels natural about it. But anyway, so the best friend killed the girl. Right before the girl got murdered, she broke up with Daniel Radcliffe, and the best friend thought it was so that they could be together.
Mm-hmm.
And here's like a major problem I have with this movie, is that this girl is way too fucking perfect. The scene where he has a flashback to where they broke up before she died. And that scene had me because she just sort of very flakily, I don't know if that's a word, flakily, but she breaks up with him for very flaky reasons. She's like, you know, I'm in my 20s, I don't want to be held down. Nobody marries their childhood sweetheart, you know. Something that I feel like would happen in real life with a 20-year-old girl. Like, she might up and fucking leave your ass. That shit happens all the time. But no, fuck realism. In the end, she had cancer, and she didn't want to break his heart or commit to him or whatever, and it's just like, oh, she was a saint the whole fucking time. This girl is so goddamn perfect that his dad and his brother are both in love with her, too. And do you understand what I'm saying here? That's just like, you had that moment where you almost made a human character, but then you fucked it all up. Do you understand how frustrating that is?
Yeah. Oh, there's plenty of movies that make that issue.
They just make this girl out to be a fucking saint, and it's like, just between that and all of, like I said, the very glamorized, romanticized shots of her just sort of smiling and dancing and stuff, it's just like, why? You didn't fool me. You might fool a lesser man, but you're not gonna fucking fool me, movie. Like, just casting a pretty actress is not character development. Anyway,
yeah. Okay. Well, I mean, it does sound.
The main issue with this movie is tone, because anything dealing with the horns, getting people to reveal themselves to him, is played for laughs for the most part. There are one or two scenes here and there where they're not so much played for laughs. For example, there's a scene where Daniel Radcliffe goes to visit his parents, and the horns make his parents tell them, like, you're a burden on us because everybody thinks you murdered this girl. You need to leave. You're making us look bad for supporting you. Just that kind of stuff, and like, I liked all that kind of stuff. I think that's the strongest part of the movie, is just the things that the horns make other people do. But once you get into that murder mystery plot, it starts taking itself a little too seriously. It jumps from... There's a scene where he confronts his brother about murdering the girl, and he may have actually done it. And then we cut to the horns make these cops tell Daniel Radcliffe that they want to blow each other, and that's played for laughs. And, like, tonally, this shit is all over the place. Like, whoever wrote this script needs to figure out what pacing means, because, like I said, you'll go from one extreme to the next, emotionally, tonally, and it's just a fucking mess. That is the biggest complaint that you will see out of this movie from critics, is that just tonally, they don't know what they're doing. They shift from one thing to the next with no care whatsoever.
You sound cut out for a moment there.
Oh, yeah, just the tone of this movie is all over the place. Like, there are no good transitional moments where you go from serious to dark comedy. It just jumps from, here's a bit of info about the murder, here's a scene that's supposed to be funny, but it's fucked up. Like, I really think this movie would have benefited from, like, maybe not being based on the book that it's based on, because it's too plotty.
Well, let me go ahead and just mention really quickly, the director of this movie also directed Piranha 3D and The Hills Have Eyes remake. So we're not exactly dealing with someone who is, an auteur.
Here's a good example of the tone being all over the place. Anything, like I said, I'm repeating myself, but anything that deals with the horns is not bad. Like, I'll give you an example. There's a scene where he goes to a doctor's office to get the horns checked out when they first pop up. Mm-hmm. He's real concerned, like, I don't know what these are, and I'll have a doctor look at them. So he goes into the waiting room of this doctor's office, and there's this woman with her child there, and her child is screaming at the top of her lungs, just being a really annoying child. And the mother looks at Daniel Radcliffe and says something to the effect of, like, I'd really like to drown my daughter in a pool and fucking kill her, like, just really dark stuff that's played for laughs, which does work. I mean, I'm a fan of dark comedy, and I think this premise could have been done way better without so much plot thrown onto it. But then you'll have, like, an intense rape scene where the girl gets murdered. She's raped before she's murdered. You see the guy rape her and then bash her over the head with a rock, and then you'll cut to a scene where two cops are confessing their gay love for each other because of the horns, and it's
so
played for laughs.
Definite tone issue.
Yeah, there are parts that are played for laughs, and then there are parts that are supposed to be intense, and they're right next to each other. Like, you have no room to breathe at all.
Mm-hmm.
This movie literally wants to do it all. It throws everything at the wall, and unfortunately very little of it sticks. It wants to be funny, it wants to be insightful, it wants to be dramatic, it wants to be horror. They just try way too many things for them to be able to balance them all, you know what I mean?
Right.
It's just too ambitious. But then we get into the real third act of the movie. After his best friend confesses that he's the one that killed the girl, they have this little fight, and he locks Daniel Radcliffe inside of his car and douses him in gasoline and burns him alive and pushes the car off of the dock. And Daniel Radcliffe survives, even though the whole town at this point, the guy went and told everybody that he killed himself, so everybody thinks he's dead. Nobody's looking for the wanted murderer anymore, I guess, so there's that. But, so he comes out of the water after this. He's all charred up, and he still has the horns. Before this point in the movie, there have been a few scenes with the murdered girl's father, and how the murder has affected him, and how he's like, Daniel Radcliffe was like a son to me because they've been lovers since they were kids, and I've known him my whole life, and how could he do this to my little girl? So after he survives being burned alive, he goes to the girl's father's house, and the girl's father is just like, oh, you were burned up and you lived. You must be supernatural or a devil or something. I accept this. I accept you now. It's so sudden because, like I said, before this, it's been nothing but hate towards Daniel Radcliffe because he's the suspect. But then as soon as he shows up all burned up and charred, he's like, all right, we're friends now. And so he helps him out. And he gives him this cross necklace, which heals him, takes all the burns away and makes the horns go away when he's wearing this cross necklace. This isn't super important, but I'll throw it out there anyway. This cross necklace was being worn by the best friend prior to this, and when he had the cross around his neck, he could not see the horns. And this cross belonged to the girl. It sort of makes sense, but they don't give anything in this movie enough leeway for it to actually make sense. It's just sort of that Stephen King-ish trope of things are just happening.
Right.
But anyway, so, okay, we have the final showdown with the bad guy and with Daniel Radcliffe. And he does not have his horns out because he has this necklace on. And he takes the cross off, and then angel wings sprout out of his back. And then he flies up into the air. And then he comes back down and lands. And then the angel wings burn up, and he becomes a devil. And then he kills the guy, and then he turns to stone. And he's gone. He gets to, I guess the whole thing there is like he gets to go to the afterlife with the girl that he loves so much. But it's like, no, what were you trying to say with angel wings? I don't understand any of this. Like, I have heard several sources refer to this as a religious satire. There's not enough satire here to call it a religious satire. Like, it's confusing. They just do not give you enough to work with for you to call this satire. You know what I mean? Like, oh my God. Like, angel wings, and then basically, like, when he turns into, like, his whole devil form, he looks like the junior version of Tim Curry in Legend. Yeah. That's really all I have to say about horns. Is just they really, really try to fucking cram so much in there. They want you to care about these characters. Let me think of some good things.
It sounds like a high concept film that.
Well, no. I think it's a pretentious high concept because I guess in theory it's a high concept, but you've done nothing to explain this high concept. There is no reason for horns or a supernatural element. There's no explanation for it. It just happens, and that's it. And I'm like, well, you know what? This is what I'm getting. There are a handful of Stephen King-isms throughout this movie, and that one, I would say, that's a really big one. Is just having this big supernatural elephant in the room that you don't explain. There are at least two 20-minute flashback scenes involving Daniel Radcliffe as a kid and the gang of kids that he hung out with, so you have sort of that it thing going on.
Well, I know that as far as Stephen King-isms, you have things like bullies who are just mean for no apparent reason. Is that something that's in this?
Not really. With that, you could probably say the town, because That's the whole thing, is like everybody is just pointing a finger at him about killing this girl, even though nobody has any evidence about it. The only evidence they have is that before she died, she broke up with him, and he got really upset about it because he didn't know she had cancer at the time. So he made this big scene at the diner where they broke up. But really, like, and like I said, I'm gonna say this, and I'm gonna try to be as tactful as possible about saying this. I understand that cancer is a real thing, but in writing, cancer can come off as so fucking forced.
I see.
This movie is no exception. Like, as soon as they wrench that cancer thing in there, I'm like, what does this have to do with anything? There was no reason for this girl to have cancer other than for you, the movie, to trick me into thinking that you were going to develop this character, which they did. I'm sorry, I don't mean to harp on that, but that really fucking pissed me off. You have this scene where it's like the girl is almost human, but she's not. She was perfect the whole time. She's a goddamn saint, and she would never hurt Daniel Radcliffe. And you know what? Fucking girls like that do not exist in real life, because people
like that don't exist in real life.
People are fickle. People, especially in their 20s, like, you want other things, and you know what I mean? Like, that's just how it works. Like, no one in the world is this perfect. I don't give a fuck if you have cancer or not.
Yeah, I think you're certainly passionate about this. I almost want to see it now, regardless of your rant.
You know, if you want to see it, and wherever that is, I need to shut it off. If you want to see it, we should definitely like have a rebuttal conversation or something.
Well, I don't know if I'll rebut it. I have to see it to judge that.
Right. Yeah.
But with that said,
yeah, that's pretty much all I have to say about Orange. If you're a super big Daniel Radcliffe fan, there are a handful of scenes that he is good in. But as a whole, this movie just it left me feeling empty. It left me feeling like it really could have done a lot better if they had removed a lot of... I just think maybe if this movie had actually gone for full-on dark comedy and just embraced the single premise in it that worked, this could have been something special. Even with Daniel Radcliffe fucking up the American accent occasionally, I think the scenes that work, the dark, funny scenes that do work, are darkly funny, and it baffles me that they're like I said, they want to have their cake and eat it too. They're like, we want to have a dark comedy, and we want to have a murder mystery, and we want to have a drama, and we want to have romance. It's just like, you guys are not talented enough filmmakers to pull all this off.
With that said, I'm going to go ahead and cut you off here, because I think we've talked about Horns.
I think I went over all my notes. The only note that I didn't point out is that there's a shit ton of snakes that help him do his bidding.
Your camera just messed up.
Oh, look at that. Yeah, there's a bunch of snakes that help him do his bidding, and I thought that was really silly. But other than that, yeah, I think I covered all my notes. So.
Well, we're going to go ahead then and segue into Nightcrawler. Now, I know that on Facebook you posted randomly, fuck Jake Gyllenhaal.
Oh, yeah, no, I didn't, that wasn't, I don't have an opinion towards Jake Gyllenhaal. I just posted that because I didn't have the means to go see Nightcrawler this week.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
Yeah, it wasn't like a personal thing. I want to see Nightcrawler. In fact, I'll just throw it out there now and say I've heard a lot of people comparing it to American Psycho, which I like a lot. So
I would certainly give that comparison. Jake
Gyllenhaal definitely piques my interest. So.
Well, let me go ahead and give a brief synopsis. In the film, Jake Gyllenhaal is kind of a struggling, out-of-work, I would say 20 or 30-something.
He's a photographer, right?
No, he really isn't anything. He doesn't have a conventional education, anything like that. But he's eager to find work. Moreover, he wants to do something enterprising. He wants to break into something.
Right.
And one day, he pulls over and sees like a car crash on the side of the road, and it's something that sort of catches his interest. And he sees this big van pull up, and an entire a camera crew start basically crowding the cops and trying to get as close of a shot as they can of the violence of this car crash. And
That's the thing. Is I don't mean to cut you off, but I did hear like a Nightcrawler is a photographer that sort of leeches around and tries to get like late night action before the news crews can get it.
So then in the morning they'll have breaking news stuff. Yeah,
I did have that explained to me. So,
and that's sort of a thing. It's interesting because in my area, morning news does not focus too much on bloody crashes.
mm-hmm.
In the Chicagoland area, the morning zoo format is much more popular, where everything is really upbeat and happy, with the exception of occasionally the token news item.
Oh, well, first of all, over here we have Good Day Philadelphia. Do you have like Good Day Chicago or anything like that on Fox?
You're familiar with WGN, the Superstation channel, right? Are you familiar with it? Your cam. Did you just freeze?
What did you say? No, I think you may have froze, but it might have been me. I don't know. What did you say?
Are you familiar with WGN?
Sort of. Not off the top of my head.
WGN is a TV channel which is available on cable, I think, like nationally, but it's really a Chicagoland staple.
Mm-hmm.
WGN morning news is kind of like the I would call it the Saturday Night Live of the morning news, because it's really just a bunch of goofballs doing silly things in the morning with the occasional news item.
Mm-hmm.
They oftentimes their segments get viral, like someone will record it and post it on YouTube. Anyway, point being, I don't live in an area where if it bleeds, it leads is a big thing in the mornings. In my area, it's more like the 5 o'clock news where you see shit like that.
Mm-hmm.
But that said, I can understand in some areas maybe it's more popular to have that hit in the morning. So with Nightcrawler, after seeing this violent car wreck and the cameraman, and he talks with one of them, played by Bill Paxton, by the way, who
Bill Paxton.
Yeah, he has a small role in the movie, and
where the fuck have you been, man?
Well, anyway, Gyllenhaal right there on the spot thinks it's cool and asks Bill Paxton for a job, and Bill Paxton kind of rebuffs him on the spot. So Gyllenhaal gets himself a cheap camera. He pawns some shit. He actually pawns a stolen bike. He gets a camera and a police scanner, and he goes out and he starts night crawling for himself. And on his first night out, he winds up finding a very bloody car accident, and he kind of breaks the rules, as in the paparazzi camera guy who's already there is keeping a safe distance between the police and the body. Gyllenhaal doesn't get into that. He fucking jumps in, pushes the cops to the side, and just gets as close as he can to the blood. And of course he gets, immediately told to get the fuck out of here. But not before he got some pretty decent footage, and he catches the interest of a local news station, which, finds it very interesting. And he sort of begins building an empire of gore on the bodies of the many people who he films. There's a line in the movie that I really like where he says, what I tell people about my business is if you see me, it's probably the worst day of your life.
Mm-hmm.
The thing that makes this movie interesting is Gyllenhaal's character, and this is where the comparison to Patrick Bateman comes down, is a pure sociopath. He's obsessive with his job, and he does a lot of research, and he likes to speak endlessly about various subjects that he's learning as he goes along. He has no problem talking about himself and everything he's doing, but he does not take anything emotionally, and he's quickly pressuring people into doing his bidding. He hires someone, for instance, to be his quote-unquote intern. He promises the kid $30 a night if he hangs around with him and follows him night crawling. Meanwhile, he subjects this kid to some very dangerous situations that wind up in some very unfortunate circumstances.
How similar is this to Training Day?
Not really.
Okay. It sounded like
Training Day from the perspective of a good guy
right.
who sees a bad guy who's like assigned to be a partner with a bad guy. This movie would be if Training Day followed Denzel Washington's character and Denzel was allowed to basically be king shit of fuck mountain.
Well, I will say this. On Double Toasted, when they reviewed this movie, they said it's sort of like you're stuck with Jake Gyllenhaal. Like, you want to leave, but you can't. Like, as an audience member, you're stuck in the car with him. And that sort of fascinated me. You know what I mean? That's
okay. I mean, if you want to count the movie camera as its own character, you could kind of take that angle on it. But yeah, it's a fascinating performance from Gyllenhaal. I don't think it's gonna get any Oscar buzz because it's too blue of a movie. You know, the violence is too bloody. It's not the kind of movie that would get. I'll give you an example. I think Rutger Hauer should have been nominated for an Oscar for Hobo with a Shotgun, but I also knew there was no fucking way that was ever going to happen, because it's not the kind of movie that generates Oscar love.
I had
Nightcrawler's the same way.
I had a similar feeling with Cabin in the Woods. I think Cabin in the Woods should have got some screenplay love, but something about horror and gore just turns the Academy off. Unless you got some tits in there. Oh, speaking of which, the actress in Horns shows her tits, and my first thought was like, sweetheart, no, not for this movie.
You know what? Let me put it this way. I think that girl actors who are starting out in the business, they get into this mindset of close your eyes and think of England.
Well, here's the deal about that. This is sort of my attempt at a joke, but it also might be some truth to it. She shows her tits in a scene where she's supposed to be fucking Daniel Radcliffe, so maybe she has some kind of like Harry Potter fetish or something, or she's like really enamored with Daniel Radcliffe. I don't know.
I'm gonna go ahead and segue out of that.
Back into Nightcrawler, yeah.
Back into Nightcrawler. There's actually something intriguing about that, in that Jake Gyllenhaal's character. At one point, he strong-arms this woman into a sexual relationship with him. But what's creepy about the movie, and I think supports the sociopathic nature of the film never shows any form of sex. You never see any nudity, other than, bleeding body kind of stuff. You never see any kissing or any heavy petting. The most intimate the movie gets is when Jake Gyllenhaal is threatening this woman, that if you don't do what I say, I'm going to ruin your career, kind of moves.
I'm ecstatic to hear that, because Horns had some awkward sex scenes in them, and it's probably just me that
right.
I find a lot of sex scenes in movies awkward.
Mm-hmm.
It depends on how they're done. It depends on the chemistry of your actors, and like I pointed out when I was talking about Horns, they don't really do shit for the girl as a character in that. So I'm
going to say that 8 times out of 10, sex scenes in movies are completely useless. The only reason they're in there is to say, throw some tits in there in order to get the dumb audiences in.
Well, I don't know about that. I think, well, yes, you could definitely use the word dumb, but I'm thinking like, yeah, tits for the guys, and chicks might get off. Like if a chick is watching, let's say, Horns or Nightcrawler, and they have a thing for Daniel Radcliffe or Jake Gyllenhaal, they could, you know what I mean? It's sort of that Avatar thing of like, I'm fucking him right now.
But with that said, yeah, Jake Gyllenhaal does not engage in any sex scenes. They make it clear that he is having sex with this character, but they do not show it. It's just very strongly hinted at, and I find that kind of refreshing because there's no need to actually show those scenes necessarily. I mean, on occasion, there are reasons to put it in. I would say a perfect example of a movie that uses sex and oozes it in no pun intended in a way that really I think is palpable would be the movie Body Heat.
I haven't seen it, but
That movie is very sexual, and yet it works in the movie's favor. It's about seducing you into the movie because the main character is being seduced himself. In this case, though, to show sex would have been exploitive.
I think
unnecessarily, and this is already a movie that's exploiting violence in.
Right.
Well, it's from a satirical perspective, it's using the deeply disturbing elements of violence to show how exploitive it can be.
Mm-hmm. Well, going back to American Psycho, like all the sex scenes in American Psycho are very awkward, and you feel like a creep watching them.
Right.
And also, if I remember correctly, there is not a single sex scene in American Psycho that he has not paid the woman for.
Right.
So you additionally feel that awkwardness of like, oh, I'm being paid for this. I have to stay here. You know what I mean? Where it's like any normal person in their right mind would fucking leave.
It's worth noting, and to get into some sexual politics in movies, American Psycho was directed by Mary Harron. It's one of the few female filmmakers who has, unfortunately, she hasn't done that many movies.
It happens.
She did I Shot Andy Warhol, The Notorious Betty Page, American Psycho, and some movie I haven't heard of called The Moth Diaries. And
that's not related to the Mothman prophecies, is it?
It's a Canadian horror film, and I don't see. No, it doesn't look like it has anything to do with it.
Okay.
But yes, point is that American Psycho feels that though, in that the sex scenes in that are not meant to be stimulating.
Yeah, they're not.
They're meant to make you feel kind of gross watching.
Yes.
Not kind of, really gross, honestly.
Yeah.
I mean,
because you have that scene where he's sitting there monologuing about Phil Collins, and he's like, "Now lick her asshole" or whatever. Like,
studio. Oh, he's monologuing about how much he prefers later stage Genesis and Phil Collins' solo work to old Genesis, which is, in my opinion, the textbook definition of a sociopath. Only a sociopath would prefer that to.
That's entirely the point of that movie and that character. I think the book, like part of the selection of the music Patrick Bateman listens to, like the.
Huey Lewis in the News.
Well, Bret Easton Ellis was like, what is the most overproduced 80s music that I could have this guy listen to and be completely enamored with that would make him seem like a total fucking lunatic? And yeah, Whitney Houston, Phil Collins, Huey Lewis in the News, post-1985.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, actually, I do want to break in here and say there was I forgot where it was, but there was a psychological survey of like the types of music that different people from different backgrounds listen to, and successful people like millionaires, self-made men on Wall Street tend to love simple pop music.
That doesn't surprise me. There's a scene in American Psycho.
Go ahead.
There's a scene in American Psycho where he's in the back of a car with Reese Witherspoon, who's his fiance, and he's just sitting there trying to listen to "Addicted to Love," or not "Addicted to Love." What is it? Fucking "Simply Irresistible."
Oh yeah.
He's trying to listen to "Simply Irresistible" by Robert Palmer, and I've brought this up on the show before. I went on a date to see the movie Borat, and I was really enamored with the film, and the girl I was with kept trying to make out with me, and I was like, stop, this is art, and I'm trying to watch this. That is sort of the reaction that Patrick Bateman displays in that scene of
on like Simply Irresistible.
Yeah, and fucking if you were to push a girl away to pay attention to something, I would rather it be Borat than Robert Palmer, and that's just me.
Yeah. Oh man, yeah. I it's like there's this one girl that I know from work who is really into music, but there are some things that she does listen to that really just like it's a questionable. You hear her go on and on her tangents about like good music, and many times she's right, but then suddenly she'll segue into just the most raw territory, and how do you
To be
go?
fair, to be fair, I think you personally could probably lay that same accusation on me because I listen to stuff that you don't agree with.
Jesus Christ! Ever since he started mentioning Andrew WK to me, now there's this commercial that starts using that fucking song. I don't. I'm just gonna say it, Bill. I was well and totally rid of my memories of Andrew WK until you mentioned his name.
I apologize for that.
You should. Thank you.
Yeah, for those listening who don't know, I had a bit of an Andrew WK phase. I still like the guy. I know Ken doesn't like him, and he'll probably be a little not cool with me talking good about him, but I like some of this stuff. I participated in his AMA recently on Reddit. I asked him,
Everyone has their guilty pleasures, but some guilty pleasures are more guilty than others.
if you know Andrew WK and you can get him to come on Kiss and Tell, help us out. Be a friend. We'd love to have him on Kiss and Tell.
Oh, Lord. I don't know if I can keep from being a douche. And I'm sure he's a cool dude.
He's not a douche. He's not a... I assure you.
That's the thing. I'm sure he's a good person and all. His music just happens to be garbage, and I'm sorry.
I don't agree with you. Yeah, I don't agree with you. I think, if anything, I will agree with you and say that the production on some of his tracks might be garbage, but I think the composition is there. I think the talent is there. And we're getting totally...
Songwriting is just about the most horrible thing.
Maybe, well, it might be, again, going back to what we were saying about American Psycho, Andrew WK might be the kind of thing that a Patrick Bateman type of character would listen to because it's super produced to sound really big, and you know what I mean? Like it has that similar 80s production value.
Moving on, because I don't think I can talk about Andrew WK any longer, otherwise my face will start bleeding.
We apologize for that. We shouldn't have been talking about that. But anyway, so as a whole, let me ask you this. If you were writing a Movie Boozer review for Nightcrawler, what would you rate it?
I'd probably give it... I'm going to go with 2 beers.
Okay.
This is off the top of my head.
Right.
If I was to make a significant criticism to the film, it would be that the film is clearly going for a satire of mass media, and I think that it mostly succeeds, but I think it fails to reach the heights that a full-on... Like, some people have compared this movie to Network, and I think that that's just not the case.
Well,
Network is a movie that brilliantly satirized the media, and it just nails it. It hits it in your head. This movie does not do that. It's much more low-key. And because it's less ambitious in where it's aiming, and to some extent less effective, it's not an absolute, dynamite movie. It's a damn good movie, and I would rewatch it for sure. I would even say pay full price to see it. But what I will say is that ultimately it's a very accomplished genre movie that kind of creates its own niche within within what I would call the psychological thriller genre, because it's a slightly it's a satirical thriller.
Well, I want to say 2 things about that. First, regarding Network. Networks was a script that had been worked on for quite some time, I think. Like, Network is the kind of script that was, like, labored over, you know what I mean? Somebody was like, I'm not stopping till I get this shit right. And that is a thing that you really don't get out of a lot of screenwriters nowadays. And I realize that, they're under time constraints a lot of the times, and it's like you have to get this done, and they are hindered by deadlines a lot. With Network, though, I do believe that script had been around and been worked on. Like, Network was a script that basically got perfected over time. You know what I mean? I don't know that the script for Nightcrawler had been around long enough for it to reach that level. But, maybe under the right hands, maybe under the right script editing, it could have been. But that's just the age we live in, where sometimes having to meet a deadline, and I don't know that was the case with this movie, but I'm saying, like, having to meet a deadline can sometimes compromise artistic integrity. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I see where you're coming with that, and I don't know much about the history of the script for Network, but I will say that
I do believe that Network was a script that had been around for at least, like, 2 years before the film was made.
I'm looking, actually, I have the Wikipedia page up here. It says that the primary inspiration for the film was a real-life on-screen suicide of a television news reporter that took place in 1974. And the
film didn't come out until 78, right?
76, actually.
Oh, okay. Well, that's 2 years. Okay.
Well, that's about right for the production time of a movie, given a little bit of leeway. So, yeah, I mean, maybe the idea was there before that. It doesn't matter. Point being, the comparison to Network does not quite hold water.
Mm-hmm. Is this based on anything, like a book or a graphic novel or anything like that?
To my knowledge, I think it's just an original screenplay, but I'm looking it up right now. If it's based on a novel, it might be kind of interesting. Okay. Written by Dan Gilroy and directed by Dan Gilroy, who's a first-time director. Yeah, it looks like he wrote a script and they gave him... Yeah, and they gave him the ability to direct it.
Well, you know what? As much as that may not make it like a perfect film like Network,
as a director's first film, it is incredibly accomplished.
Everything I've heard about Nightcrawler intrigues me and makes me want to see it.
The thing you have to understand, giving 2 beers to a movie is still a huge compliment.
I agree. Yeah,
there are plenty of movies that I would give 3, maybe even 4 beers to that I actually legitimately love and would rewatch any day.
Yeah.
By giving it 2 beers, I'm being serious that this is one of the year's best movies. It's just not quite, as it's there are. I have some standards to award a toast to a movie, and actually, this is a good segue. The next movie that I'd like to discuss, which I'm not going to go into as long of a discussion about because I want to go over this with someone else who's seen this movie. So we might save the greater discussion of it for next week.
Yeah, hopefully I'll be able to see it by then. We're referring to the film Birdman, for those who don't know it. And the thing about Birdman...
As it will be probably called at the Academy Awards, because they have to say the entire title, Birdman or the Unexpected Virtue of Ignorance.
Birdman, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Atomic Bomb.
Based on the novel Push by Sapphire.
Oh, I love that joke.
That's a joke that will never get old.
Oh, yeah. I love it. I just made a joke about it recently. I don't remember what it... Oh, it was about the Fat Girl song, All About That Bass. I made a big rant about this pop song called All About That Bass.
Okay.
Maybe we'll post it sometime. You guys can read it. But anyway, back to Birdman.
Birdman, The Unexpected Virtue of Ignorance, based on the novel Push by Sapphire, a film by Tyler Perry. I could keep going with subtitles. It's not any of those things. It is it is directed by Alejandro Gonzalez Inarritu, I think it's pronounced. I'm not very... there are so many accents and other accents, apostrophes, squiggles on this guy's name. It's ridiculous. At the N, yeah, I think that's what they call it when there's the squiggle over the N.
What I wanted to point out is that the closest this movie is playing to me is in Philadelphia, and
Which
honestly,
is what, an hour from you?
probably, maybe even closer to the amount that you traveled to see it, which Ken traveled about 45 minutes to see this film.
Right.
If
very
I had
basic-
if
very-
I had went
Go ahead.
if I had went to see this in Philadelphia, it probably would have been the same amount of time, about 45 minutes. But I'm not into that. I'm not. I don't. I shouldn't have to travel across state lines to watch a movie. And I'm a very adamant. Yeah, like I'm not.
Spoken like a true small state person.
I guess. Yeah, I guess that is what it is. And it's. But the other thing about it is that I know that this movie is getting a lot of buzz, and I know this movie will be expanded. This movie will probably play at my local theater. And as soon as it does, I'm going to be like, why did I go to Philadelphia to see this? You know what I mean?
Well, I'm not going to tell you, how in what format you see this movie, other than make sure you see it make sure the people you go see it with are people who have an open mind about movies. Do not let them, do not go to the movie with people who are very set in their ways about film.
My favorite movie is Insidious Chapter 2. Let's go see Birdman.
Well, a good litmus test here is if this person's favorite movie at any given time, like they will tell you that their favorite movie is a movie that came out within the last 3 years. Because that's just, don't get me wrong, it could potentially, you can make an argument, but if you're going to say, oh, you know what, Batman, The Dark Knight Rises is the best movie ever made. I loved it.
Or I would say The Dark Knight, because The Dark Knight has some issues.
Even saying that. But I know that one has a little bit more of a...
that's got a lot of clout. Yeah, that one's got the most clout.
Even if you said that, I'm going to challenge you to, I'm going to ask, explain to me how that's your favorite movie. Because these are people who see movies as a dispensable thing, as fast food. They see a movie as a Big Mac, as in it's going to taste pretty much the same every time I have it. Sure, it tastes fine. But what?
You're good. Continue. All I heard was fast food because you kind of lagged out, and I don't know if it was my connection or your connection, and I don't want to draw.
Okay. So. Well, what I was going to say is that, to me, some people see movies as a consumable good, and some see movies as art. If you're going to a movie to see as a consumable good, you won't like Birdman, because Birdman is not a film that you can just see and throw out. It will stick in your mind. You won't be able to get rid of it. And if you're the kind of person who likes that, who likes to consider the meaning of a movie and to consider everything that happened and to relive it in your head a million times, Birdman might be for you. This is my toast film, and this is the first film this year that I would give a toast to.
The first?
Yes, and that...
Not even Grand Budapest.
Oh, you know what? You just reminded me. I'm thinking about it. That's a tough one.
That's a good movie, man.
I'm gonna have to think about that one.
I might have to say Grand Budapest is a toast, honestly.
You know what? I'm not ready to say that for certain.
Okay. I know you would agree that Moonrise is a toast, though.
Moonrise? Yeah, I would give that one a toast.
I think Grand Budapest exceeds Moonrise.
I don't know about that.
I think it does, and it's just me. Maybe it was the fact that it's a little bit less sincere than Moonrise Kingdom was. Just because Moonrise Kingdom comes off as so sentimental at times that it didn't turn me off, but a lot of people I heard talk about the film, it did turn them off. Personally, I thought Moonrise Kingdom was and I say this with no hyperbole whatsoever, I think it's one of the most adorable fucking things I've ever seen in my life.
I'm actually checking right now so that before I talk to see if there was another movie this year that I gave a single beer to. I'm checking. I've written plenty of one beer movie reviews this year, but
What
most of
about
them
Guardians?
I'm looking at the movies I actually. Here's the thing. It's harder for me to say how many beers I would give a movie unless I actually write the review.
Right,
Because
I understand
until I
that.
sit down and think about that and really superbly overanalyze it.
If anybody listening to this has heard our discussion on Guardians of the Galaxy, yeah, I bitched about Ronan a lot throughout that review, but I would give Guardians a toast because it's just that fucking good.
Okay, well, here. Let me rephrase what I said. Birdman is the first new movie that I've written a review for this year, which I would give a toast to. And
I didn't know. Time out. You wrote the review for that?
Yes.
Okay, I didn't know that. I'm gonna have to go read it because I saw the review pop up and I just assumed that it was someone else. I had no idea that it was you that wrote it. So now I'm gonna have to go read it.
Well, with that said, let me get into the story a little bit, and I'm gonna avoid spoilers as much as possible with this because it's a strange cyclical movie.
Well, that and yeah, I haven't seen it yet. So if you're worried about spoilers, don't worry because I haven't seen it. I don't want him to spoil it, and I have faith in Ken that he will not.
Well, the movie stars William Wallace, and he gets tortured to death at the end. While a sled in the background that has Rosebud printed on it starts burning, and at the same time an iceberg hits the ship, and the whole thing goes down.
Oh God!
This is a joke that I've said at least 5 times on this podcast, but I love it.
Anyway. You need to work in a Gone with the Wind reference.
Oh perhaps, yeah, and frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn. Okay.
Well, no, I don't mean that specifically. I meant more towards the Mammy character.
Mammy just kind of disappears, though, in Gone with the Wind. She's in the first, half of the movie, and then I think she might be in the background in a couple scenes towards the end. So... Who's
the other slave in that?
Oh,
the one that...
Chrissy. I gave... If you've ever read my review of Gone with the Wind, you will know that I gave that movie a 6-pack.
I will say, yeah, check out his review of Gone with the Wind because I think it's fantastic. You brought to light things that...
Before you get into this, I love old school epic filmmaking. Gone with the Wind fails at that in every fucking way. Mm-hmm. It's a shitty soap opera, but you have to sit down and watch 5 episodes in a row. That's all it is. So, with that said...
Yeah.
Birdman, or The Unexpected Virtue of Ignorance, stars Michael Keaton as Riggin Thompson. Riggin Thompson is an actor who in the early 90s was really big because of a trilogy of films for a superhero called Birdman, who, of course, is not based on Harvey Birdman, attorney at law.
But even,
Or Birdman, the cartoon series.
Well, yeah, the
or
classic.
Was it the 70s, maybe?
It was both, I think. But, yeah, the classic old Birdman cartoons by Hanna-Barbera, yeah. Right.
No basis on that. I'm guessing because the person who wrote the film and directed it is from Mexico, that he probably was not familiar with the Hanna-Barbera series.
You don't know, because, what was it, 2 years ago, we had a feature Top Cat film from a Mexican animation studio, so apparently they're familiar with Hanna-Barbera.
Okay. Well, either way, point being, Riggin Thompson is a actor who was offered a chance in 1992 to sign on and do a 4th Birdman movie because the 3rd one was such a huge hit.
Mm-hmm.
And he walked away because he was done. He decided, you know what? I don't want to be judged by this. very much like Michael Keaton did with Batman.
Hey, that's a great, yeah. Oh, holy shit.
It's a direct reference there.
Yeah.
Um, and fast forward 20 years in the future, Riggin is now a actor who he's struggled to define himself over the last 20 years. He's had a series of less and less successful films, and finally he's now on Broadway, and he's written an adaptation of a famous play, or of a famous short story by Raymond Carver, and he's trying to put it on Broadway. And it's kind of his passion project. So you have Michael Keaton in this role where he's playing a character in similar circumstances to which he was in, or rather you could argue, until recently was in, with the exception of the way they're handled. Michael Keaton, despite the fact that he had some difficulty defining himself after Batman, I don't think anyone's going to argue that Michael Keaton has always been the best guy in the room. Like, even in movies that are terrible, he's usually one of the better things about that movie.
What was he in? He was in something recently. Was it that...
He was in Need for Speed.
Yeah, but there was something. Wasn't he in that Chris Pines movie, that fucking John Ryan or whatever? Jack Ryan. Ryan.
You're thinking Robert Redford? Maybe?
Oh, okay. Well, that's a shame.
Oh, wait, no, that wasn't Robert... Jesus, I'm thinking of Captain America the Winter Soldier. Jesus. No, it was Kevin Costner who was in that.
Kevin Costner, yeah. He tried to...
Kevin Costner's another actor who's gone through what I would call very much a Michael Keaton scenario, though, where there were a series of bad movie choices that kind of led into a bit of a slump. With that said, he was one of the better things about the RoboCop remake, which was a pretty terrible movie overall.
That's what I'm thinking of, is the RoboCop remake.
Yeah, he was the best thing about Need for Speed. He was, but the thing is, he hasn't been in a whole lot of decent movies. I mean, when you consider one of the best, like one of his most successful movies financially of the last like couple of decades was Jack Frost.
Oh, well, I mean, you bring that up, but he was in Jackie Brown around the same time.
He was in Jackie Brown, but that was 1997. Jack Frost was 98. He rebounded off of Jackie Brown to do Jack Frost.
The thing, well, I will say this about Jack Frost, is that for all you fans of making fun of movies out there, you've got a Nostalgia Critic episode of Jack Frost, which is fantastic, and the How Did This Get Made with Dan Harmon of Jack Frost, which I will say about that episode of How Did This Get Made, when they do the second opinion, when they read the Amazon reviews for Jack Frost, it is fucking hysterical. Oh my god.
One thing that none of those reviews covered is a bit of trivia that I love about Jack Frost, in that 3 of Frank Zappa's 4 kids appear in the movie. Dweezil Zappa, Ahmet Zappa, and Moon Unit Zappa are all in it.
And they, tying this into Kiss and Tell here, they all performed on one track on Gene Simmons' second solo album called Asshole. So
wow, that's
with Frank Zappa, because Gene Simmons wrote a song with Frank Zappa before he died. That's fucked up.
Yeah, so we got off track here, but
we did. Back to Birdman.
So anyway, he's just about 4 days away from his huge premiere, and before the premiere, there are 3 preview shows. Now, something you may or may not know about a Broadway play is it's common practice before the premiere, where the critics are invited to come watch and write reviews. They have preview shows where they sell tickets just like any other play, but it's sort of like an understood thing that the critics won't come in and write a review based on the previews, because the previews are basically a chance for the theater company to take what, to work the kinks out of the production. Anyway, so there's 3 previews that they're facing, and they've just lost one of the co-stars of the play to a violent accident. And at the last second, Edward Norton's character, his name is Mike Shiner, is brought in. Now, Norton's character is a highly respected Broadway actor, and it's sort of a coup for Michael Keaton to be able to get him for the play. The downside, though, is he's also fucking crazy. Norton is the character of Mike Shiner is an actor who overcommits to the point where he is basically he's an actor who doesn't even know who he is in real life. He only knows who he is when he's on stage and he's got a script to walk him through it.
Sort of like Robert Downey Jr. in Tropic Thunder.
Yeah, that's actually not a bad comparison. In this film, for instance, as a good example, he has problems with erectoral dysfunction.
Erectile, but yeah, that's
erectoral.
You did.
probably
You
have
did.
the elections on my
You
mind.
you were thinking of the Electoral College.
Yeah, you're right. I must. Yeah, the erectile dysfunction. Jesus. Anyway,
So that's a thing in this movie, like
right. It's a rep. But here's the thing: when his character's on stage and he's supposed to get it, he gets one.
he gets
and-
wood on stage.
Well, specifically, there's a scene where his character is supposed to be having sex with another character, and because it's him and his longtime girlfriend who are playing together, he basically insists on doing it for real, and she of course fights him off because that's an absurd idea on stage. So the previous not screenings, but the previous shows go horribly wrong because shit like this keeps happening. Meanwhile, Riggin, Michael Keaton's character, keeps slipping in and out of what I would call sanity because he starts hearing voices in his head. And the voice he starts hearing in his head is what I would like to call a parody of the Christian Bale Batman. Michael Keaton doing his best Christian Bale Batman.
Oh my God.
Which is supposed to be the voice of Birdman, so sort of like a voice from the past. The cool person that he used to be is calling him.
Hey Thompson, where are the other drugs going?
Exactly.
Tell me where they went.
That's what's great. It's like a spot-on parody of that Christian Bale voice.
So Birdman is an avatar for Batman.
Gee, who'd have thunk it?
I didn't think it. No, I really didn't. And
So anyway, the movie also stars Zach Galifianakis as Jake, who is Michael Keaton's lawyer, and it's a very rare thing for Galifianakis because it's a straight man role. He really isn't a humorous character.
he's done them before. I would say to very, very minimal effect. He's in this movie called Imagineers or something, and I forget what the title of it is, but it's weird. It's Zach Galifianakis trying to play this like dramatic straight role, and but that's the thing is like who knows who made that. With this though, I have more faith in that. You know, he could probably pull some shit out of his ass. And it's not to say that Zach Galifianakis hasn't done dramatic roles in the past, because he has.
Right, and he was in Up in the Air, for instance.
Yeah, there's something. It's totally eluding me, but there was something I saw him in. At least
Into the Wild, he was in?
No, it wasn't that one. I can't remember.
Well, either way, his character is a straight man, and he does very well with it.
Mm-hmm.
And I have to applaud Galifianakis. I'd like to see more straight-up acting for him, because I think he does a good job. Emma Stone plays Michael Keaton's character's Riggins' daughter, who is recovering from a drug addiction, and is sort of her way of sort of trying to stay away from drugs is hanging out with her father and sort of being a gopher. for her father on set, but she still has a lot of problems, and particularly some personality issues that cause her to kind of creep people out. Which, of course, anyone who is recovering from drug addiction probably has gone through that issue before in their life. And with that, the way the movie breaks down, and what I find fascinating about it, is the entire movie is shot cleverly edited to feel as if it takes place in a single, unbroken sequence. And it's something you can compare to live theater very easily, because with live theater, they have to make it flow, and this is a movie that flows. Every scene moves directly into the scene that precedes it. I really appreciated that. I thought it was a good symbol for live theater. I think that the performances are top-notch. Michael Keaton gives one of the best performances of his career, if not his best. He's definitely going to get some Oscar love for it. Edward Norton could get some Oscar love for his crazy off-the-wall antics of a character. And I don't want to go too much into spoilers, because I really want you to see this, Bill.
Right, yeah, and I want to see it too. I think maybe once the end of the year approaches, we can probably have a more spoiler-filled discussion of this. But
well, there's no doubt we're going to talk about this movie at least one more time, because Bill Arsenault is going to want to talk about it. And considering it's expanding a little bit this weekend, some more people are probably going to see it. There's a chance that Hawk Ripjaw might join us.
I hope the expansions continue, because if it's expanded again and it's still not at my local theater, I don't know. Like, it's just definitely one of those things where the rate that they're giving this out is sort of weird. You know what I mean? Like, they don't want too many people to see it right now.
Well, yeah, it's sort of like what they did last year. Why the Coen Brothers movie Inside Llewyn Davis got the shaft. It was sort of a war between studios to have, like, who's going to have the last prominent winter space for an Oscar movie. And the problem was they waited too long, and Inside Llewyn Davis didn't get a wide expansion until well into January. And as a result, by the time it got that expansion, no one was giving two fucks.
The only Oscar love that movie got was like sound mixing or something.
It got some tacit nominations.
Yeah, and it's really super disappointing, because I was actually just listening to the soundtrack of that earlier today, and even just the soundtrack can invoke, like, if you've seen the film and then go and listen to the soundtrack, that shit will invoke the same emotions you get from watching the film, just because it takes you right back to those moments. And then that's
absolutely, it embodied the music like few films.
Oh, well. Yeah,
it really did. And that's, I think that's where what a lot of people missed about the film, and part of it might be my own bias in that my mind is heavily steeped in the lore of that time period in the folk scene in New York. I've read so much about it. I've seen a lot of documentaries about it. I know a lot about the character that Llewyn Davis is loosely based on, and his own struggles as a musician, that being Dave Van Ronk, who, by the way, if you've ever heard his versions of the songs that Llewyn Davis sings, it's amazing how Oscar Isaac just nailed the cadence. They weren't direct, like, sound-alike versions.
Oh no, yeah, that's
any means, but he nailed the heart and soul of it, and that's the beauty of folk. Is it doesn't have to sound alike. It just has to. It has to come from the soul.
You need to have your emotions on your sleeves to make that shit work, and oh my God, did they make the right choice casting Oscar Isaac for that role? Because like every single piece of that soundtrack that he performs, you can just tell, like, his heart and soul are in it.
Mm-hmm. So with that said, I'm going to go ahead and we're going to make this a shorter podcast, but before we end, I want to do a quick just Netflix recommendations.
Oh, good. Go, because I have something to add to that. It's not Netflix, but...
Well, I wanted to focus on Netflix, but what's your recommendation? We'll go with that first.
Well, I mentioned a few, probably months ago now, that I had discovered the Eric Andre show, and I love it. It's fucking... I love it so much. It's probably my favorite show on television right now, and it comes back tomorrow, Thursday night, October... What is today? Today is the 5th. It comes back on the 6th, October 6th at 12:15 a.m. New Eric Andre. I am so fucking hype. I cannot wait. It's just it's right up my alley, I gotta say.
Okay. Well, that's good. A recommendation that I have for Netflix: Snowpiercer was just added to Netflix.
Was it? Okay, that's a big deal because I haven't seen that yet, so I'm gonna have to jump on that.
Yep, highly recommended. It's a fun movie. Don't overthink it. It's a movie that if you get too wrapped up in the believability of some elements, you might just, overanalyze it. It's just go into it and expect to be entertained.
Okay.
Another movie I have to recommend: In a World.
Oh, the trailer thing.
Yes, with Lake Bell, and Dimitri Martin's also in it.
I will say this about that film. Whoever that girl is the daughter of, I'm sure he did great work in trailers. But let's be honest here. You're not Don LaFontaine.
Have you seen the movie?
No, I haven't, but I just have to say,
because the movie addresses that directly.
Okay. Well, okay. I haven't. Well, then that actually.
The movie basically opens with explaining that Don LaFontaine was the aforementioned king.
Right.
And here's the thing: after Don LaFontaine died, the "In a World" line was more or less phased out of movie trailers.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
The entire premise of the movie is a studio has this big movie coming out, and they've decided they want to find the right voice to resurrect In a World. And the movie is sort of a feminist statement in that the character played by Lake Bell, who also directed the movie, believes that it's time for a woman to claim In a World. Now, before you go into it, I agree with you that you're never going to get the grittiness of In a World from a female voice, but she finds a way in the movie to hit upon a different approach to it that I think fits perfectly.
Well, I will say this. Just you mentioning it here makes me interested because it was something I saw on Netflix that I just sort of said
It's not a perfect movie by any means. It's clearly made on a very low budget, and I'm sure most of the actors who appear on it were doing it as a favor to the director. But it has a great cast. I mean, you have small roles from Ken Marino, Dimitri Martin, Rob Corddry, Nick Offerman, Eva Longoria, Tig Notaro, Notaro, I think it's pronounced. I shouldn't get that. And Jeff Garlin appears in it even. It's really, a who's who of unique performers. Plus, the voice acting community is represented quite heavily as well.
I just want to say, every single person you just named, I love. But special consideration, special shout out for Rob Corddry, because Rob Corddry did an interview with Movie Boozer, and you can check that out on our website, and you totally fucking should. 2 thumbs up for Rob Corddry, man. He did a fucking interview with Movie Boozer.
2 thumbs up and 2 thumb-like toes up.
Hell yeah!
Yeah, Rob motherfucking Corddry.
Oh yeah,
absolutely, and I love his stuff. But yeah, he's great in the movie. Actually, he plays a cuckolded husband, and
I thought it was a documentary. What is this?
Wait, you thought it was a documentary?
I thought, what? It's not a documentary. I'm totally
Holy
confused.
shit! After all this time, I described the plot, and no, it is a drama, comedy drama.
I thought it was a documentary about voice acting for trailers.
No.
I fucked up.
Wow.
Yep.
You've clearly done a lot of research on this movie.
I read the Netflix description, and that's what it made me think that it was.
Yeah, it's not. And that's, to be honest, I almost would have preferred a documentary, but I think the film takes a nice low-key approach. It's an imperfect movie, but considering it's a first-time writer-director, I give it more credit. I think that there's a lot the movie has to say,
Okay.
and you know what? I like the appeal of the movie, and I want to see more from Lake Bell.
This stuff, yeah, this makes me feel a lot better about it because when assuming that it was a documentary, I just kept thinking to myself like, well, how much are they going to talk about LaFontaine? And that makes me that makes me a voice actor snob, and whatever. I'll take that title, but you got to admit, like LaFontaine made movie trailers back in the day, like.
No. Yeah, In a World it's a comedy film with some dramatic elements that was made. Actually, it says here the movie was made for less than $1 million.
I am so shocked. Yeah, I have to say, like, I am really taken aback by learning all this because I just assumed that it was a documentary about trailer narration, and that'd be cool to get a movie like that. That's what I had assumed that it was. So I was like, I'll check this out eventually. But now that you're telling me it's something more personal and something more narrative driven, like, yeah, I feel obligated to check this out.
So with that, I think that's a good point with which to leave this episode.
Yeah.
And want to thank you for joining us on tonight's MovieBoozer.com podcast. And join us next week when we might very well be talking about a couple of the same movies because I'm sure that Bill A is going to want to talk Birdman. And so I saved a little bit of my choice comments for that.
Yeah, totally. And hopefully you'll see Horns and we can get back together and talk about Horns.
More importantly, this weekend, though, Interstellar comes out.
And Big Hero 6.
Big Hero 6.
I don't know that I'm going to get around to seeing both of them per se, but we'll see.
I'm sorry. I have to give one more Netflix recommendation because I just saw it pop up. The original Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, the movie, is back on Netflix.
I like that movie, so I have no issues with that.
I'm not going to say that it's a great movie or even a good movie, but it's a damn entertaining nostalgia trip from 1990. So,
I will say this: you brought it up just now, so you knew what you were getting into bringing it up. I don't think it's great, but I would definitely say good because, like, I think it was James Rolfe that said this. The angry video game nerd James Rolfe said, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, the original 1990 film, was like a perfect transitional piece for the 80s to the 90s.
Mm-hmm.
And watch it. Like, it totally fucking is that. Like, it is a perfect transition from the 80s cheese to sort of the 90s batitude. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I can see that. It sort of takes a little bit of both elements.
As a cultural piece, I think that's the highest praise I can give it, is that somehow it manages to feel both like an 80s movie and a 90s movie at the same time. It really fucking does.
Well, with that said, I think that's a good way to go out on this, and so we'll see you next week.
And don't waste your time on that Michael Bay nonsense. That's a bunch of garbage.